Good morning, everybody, from my side. My name is Andre Jackson. Can you hear me okay in the back? I am terribly nervous. Apparently, it doesn't always show, but if I do speak too fast or anything like that, just please signal, right? If I'm not loud enough, let me know. Try and make adjustments. This is a presentation about my doctoral work. I actually graduated last Friday. Which was on waking up. We'll go into what that means, how I did it, what the results were. Dr. Hassan here was on my committee. Thank you very much. So you've seen most of these slides, okay, but I made some adjustments. I do not work in this field. I'm a software consultant. And maybe as a result, there's a lot of information on some of my slides. I do not expect you to be able to absorb all of it. Some of them, I essentially condensed my entire literature review to 2 slides. So there's a lot going on. I'll just show that real quick. If anybody's interested, I'm more than happy to share my slides so you can consume it at your leisure, because it's too much to talk about all of that in detail. So yeah, the title of the presentation is Waking Up. What the narratives of former Jehovah's Witnesses, Bethelites reveal about recognizing and rejecting systemic manipulation. So it's a lot. By show of hands, if you're okay with it, can you indicate to me if you're familiar with Jehovah's Witnesses? I think that's most, but not everybody. Okay. So in case I use any terms that that you don't understand, just let me know. I think I've explained most of them, but then 1 or 2 may have snuck in there. So the agenda, this essentially reflects my dissertation, 5 chapters. Talk a little bit about the background of the study, a little bit of background about Bethel, what that is for the non-Jehovah's Witnesses. Then the literature review, those are like the crazy slides. I have 1 slide, I think, on methodology, and then the bulk of the presentation really then is about the findings, the chronology, and the themes, and I'll explain why I focus on chronology and themes, and then at the end there's a slide on the conclusions. So, don't forget, here, is this distorted? No. So the purpose was to better understand the experiences of Jehovah's Witnesses, Bethelites who wake up. That is born by the fact that I grew up as a Jehovah's Witness, and the things that helped me wake up, realize that I was in a cult. When I talked to my mom or to my girlfriend, the reactions I got were very different from my own experiences. So I was really curious as to like, how come some people wake up when exposed to certain things and other people do not? I was really curious as to like, what is waking up? And what I thought was really interesting was that a lot of ex-witnesses used the expression waking up. I'm like, is this, why is that? So that was what I was curious about. I focused on Jehovah's Witnesses, Bethelites, which are sort of core members. So if you look at the pyramid here, they're more of core devotees, leaders, and sub-leaders. They're highly privileged in the organization. And they're underrepresented in research. So that's what I focused on. To give you an impression of what Bethel is, here's 4 pictures of different Bethel compounds in different areas. On the top left-hand side is the world headquarters in upstate New York. On the top right-hand side is one of the 15 printeries they have. I don't know if they still operate them all, but officially that's the case. You see one in Germany, and then another educational center in Patterson, New York. So when we talk about Bethel, it's not necessarily only the world headquarters, but any of these regional headquarters compounds. And Bethelites are Jehovah's Witnesses who live in these facilities. Not all of them do, but the ones that I considered for my research are ones that live in these facilities and work there. They represent about 0.25% of all witnesses. This is the vow. This is maybe not legible, I don't know. But what I didn't know when I was a witness was the vow that they have to pledge to the organization when they move into Bethel. This is the vow. I want to make sure it's documented, so I included it in my dissertation. And the parts that I highlighted here just highlight how they pledge to be submissive, to obey the orders, no matter what. The things highlighted in green is about the financial things. They're asked to turn over all income that they receive to to not expect any remuneration. They essentially work for free. They get like a very small stipend, but it's very, very small. So as a result, the Bethelites are especially interesting to me because they financially depend on the organization. They live in these compounds. So in addition to all the other control mechanisms and dependencies, like in terms of the social environment, in this case, the scrutiny, the monitoring, the degree of monitoring is even higher, and they financially depend on the organization. So as part of my literature review, I wanted to establish that indeed Jehovah's Witnesses are a cult. So there's a lot going on. I did create this slide and the next one because I told a pastor from a church what I was working on, and he asked me to present to his congregation. So I really tried to condense everything onto a few slides. I spent 3 or 4 hours just talking about this, which is why I know this is too much, but I'm happy to share. This really just is a very thorough analysis of the organization to establish that indeed it is a cultic organization. Like I said, I'm happy to share this. The next one, I use Dr. Hassan's bite model and really go into the different areas of control around behavior, information, emotion, and thinking. And something that I think is maybe a little unusual about my research, about my literature review, I included plenty of references to material that the Jehovah's Witnesses themselves have published. Because my hope is that active Jehovah's Witnesses who may come across this, they probably would reject a lot of statements by non-witnesses because it's academia, it's Satan's world, it's worldly stuff, it's demonic. I have over 300 citations to Jehovah's Witnesses material, and in some cases it's really amazing because it's almost like they're trying to meet the definition of some of these things. Like in some cases, they talk quite openly about trying to change people's personality, for example, right? Or try to control what information they access. So that was very interesting. Then, as part of the framework to analyze what I was going to analyze, I looked into different deconversion models. Here's like a select number of models that I sorted chronologically. They just describe what other scholars have established as deconversion, the process of deconversion, what happens when people lose their faith, which gave me a good framework, some terminology to use and to know what I might expect as I go through these stories. What I've highlighted here in the center are deconversion characteristics that Streib and Keller have highlighted, which was particularly interesting to me to see what is sort of the focus as people talk about their deconversion. What do they focus on? Is it a loss of religious experience? Is it doctrinal disagreement? Is it moral outrage? Is it suffering? What's the focus? And that is something that actually did pop up then later in the analysis. Then I sort of focused in on 2 particular terms, disillusionment and disaffection. The visual that you see here is from an ex-Jehovah's Witness who wrote an autobiographical manga, which was very touching, made me cry when I read it. And it was interesting because I really felt, I recognized a lot of my own experience in these stories. And again, like I said, understanding these terms and how other scholars and ex-members have used expressions or similar expressions to describe what they go through. So disillusionment here and sort of the cognitive disengagement, right? Which destroys belief. So a loss of belief as compared to the disaffection, which is an effective disengagement and then a withdrawal that breaks the group's dominance. And in some of the stories, you can really see how there's 2 phases. It's not necessarily the case that they're separate. It's not necessarily the case that one precedes the other, but it's a good, like I said, a good framework to understand and have words to describe what people are going through, what they're experiencing. In terms of the method that I used, I did a narrative inquiry, and I did that because I was curious about the process, right? How does it happen and what is it? People all like, the stories I heard people talk about waking up, but it was never really discussed. What is that actually? Like, what does it mean to you when you say you woke up? So I was curious as to what is it and how does it happen? And for that, narrative inquiry is a great approach. I analyzed archival data. The idea I got for that was this podcast Shunned. Michael, who's the host of this podcast, talked last year at the conference, and it's something I'm going to bring up again at the very end. There is a lot of data out there for anybody who's itching to do some research and isn't sure about how to get to the members or the ex-members and get to their data. There's a lot of data publicly available. So I use archival data here, mostly YouTube interviews, podcasts. In some cases, I wanted to sort of like dig a little bit further because some of the interviews focus on very particular aspects of the experience when people were involved in the scandal. They focus a lot on that, not so much on the waking up experience. So I then looked into other interviews of that same individual just to get a little bit a richer data set. I did exclude all ex-Jehovah's Witnesses who left Bethel as unbelievers or those who entered as unbelievers, which was a bit of a surprise. I came across several individuals who said in their interview they stopped believing. They did not believe this was the truth anymore. And then they moved into the compound and lived and worked there for years. I'm really curious to understand why they would do that, but I couldn't reach out to them. It's the water. In the screenshot there at the bottom, you see the participants that I ended up including 6 individuals. You see all of them were at least second generation, most of them multi-generational. They were all baptized pretty young, with the exception of William, whose parents became witnesses when he was a teenager. They were in different countries. They all served multiple years at Bethel. Most of them left in their 20s and 30s, and 2 of them were married. And then at the end, you see the status. I think that's one of the acronyms I haven't explained. PMO, for those not familiar, this means physically in, mentally out, which is very relevant in the deconversion process because there are individuals who lose their faith but remain affiliated with the organization because they have so much to lose. They choose to remain a Jehovah's Witness even though they don't believe. That's me. I'm technically still a Jehovah's Witness. I haven't been disfellowshipped. I haven't disassociated myself, but I don't believe anymore. So I'm a PMO. So now the findings. Any questions so far? Oh, okay.
Where are the women?
There's no women in the data set. Yeah, it's not because I wanted to exclude them. It's just because I didn't find any. I went through the usual channels and used certain criteria. There's all described in detail in the work, but yeah, no women showed up. There were some women who left Bethel and then lost their faith, but I didn't find any that were at Bethel when they lost it. Yeah. You had a question?
Yeah, what will happen to you when Armageddon comes?
Depends on who you ask. Yeah, but I mean, my mom's
Just to check if you're really.
yeah, no, it's tough. I mean, it's not the focus of this, but my mom is convinced I'm going to die. You know, yeah.
Why are you still visiting him? Is there a reason?
Because my mother. Yeah, so my mother is still a believing Jehovah's Witness. She's a very much so. And my mom hasn't talked to me for a couple of years, but that's currently her choice. If I were to officially disaffiliate, then she would be obligated to shun me. And I want to give her the option. Yeah. Also, I don't want to play by the rules anymore. Like they have a process, what do I care?
Does it ever feel uncomfortable though, or is it a good tactical?
No, not really. I mean, it doesn't feel uncomfortable. Yeah, well, technically, I mean, other than maybe I show up in the numbers. Yeah, but other than that, and I do like that it allows me to talk to active Jehovah's Witnesses without having to be deceptive, because I am still a member. All right, do have a lot. Let's move on. The findings, chronology. So this was really just in terms of like what happens, what is this process? There is no big surprises in here, but some of it was interesting nevertheless. So I noticed that all participants had doubts. there was no person who didn't have doubts, which was interesting. So they just managed their doubts. The Mormons often talk about putting them on the shelf. Jehovah's Witnesses talk about like leaving it in Jehovah's hands, to not necessarily expect or need an explanation for their questions and their criticisms. Usually that happened on their own initiative, but on occasion they were told to just like put it aside, like don't worry about it, right? It's all, there's different explanations that are provided, you know. But the key bit here was that they all have doubts before they started waking up. Then there was an initial doubt event. In all narratives, there was a moment where people said, this was the first time I realized something wasn't quite right, or something didn't feel right, or I noticed I was disappointed. They noticed that they disagreed with something, that there was a challenge to what they believed that they couldn't explain away, that they felt disappointed, felt exhausted, or they suspected they were being lied to. In most cases, there were then additional events that followed that. Oh, and by the way, you'll have noticed I put a number of quotes below. I will not read them because I don't have enough time. It was important to me to give voice to these ex-witnesses because these voices are often being suppressed and it matters. So they're there. Next, then there was a trigger event. This was when they decided to take an action, which is why I chose the term trigger, right? It was something that was directly associated with waking up. What was interesting, it was that these were unintentional and not anticipated. It's not, despite the watchdog organization's frequent accusation, these were not people that were begrudgingly trying to find something that's wrong with the organization. In a lot of cases, they were like surprised, like they didn't mean to find something or get triggered or wake up. They ran into something, and I guess because it wasn't expected, they looked further into it, and that was then often the trigger for them. In every case, it motivated them to take action, and that resulted then in the culmination of the waking up, which is the next step here, or next two, the unsuccessful doubt resolution. Like I said, in every case after the trigger, they tried to resolve their doubt. And what was interesting is when they were not successful, it was not a neutral event. In any case, when they were not successful, it made it worse because they expected to be able to resolve their doubt. So the research and the evaluation they did was in most cases self-permitted, but on occasion it would approach other Jehovah's Witnesses and say, here's my question. And then it would say, well, do more research. And that made it worse. And that's one of the themes later on that I think is very important to this. Another thing that was very interesting is that it was only at this stage in the process where they allowed themselves to consume apostate information. Among Jehovah's Witnesses, that's a label that's applied to former members who are critical. And it's anathema, like believing Jehovah's Witnesses will reject anything that's labeled apostate. If you're an apostate, I will not talk to you. I will not read what you have published. I will not watch. If you're being interviewed on the news, I will not watch the news. Apostates are like the worst thing. They're mentally diseased and they're trying to infect you. Yeah. That's how they're being viewed, and which is why that information is being avoided at all costs. This was the first point when they allowed themselves to consume apostate information that they knew was critical of the organization. And then finally, the turning point at the end, the culmination, is when they realized or determined something that made them reject the organization. And I did disconnect the turning point from the trigger event because going back to what I had mentioned early on with the key characteristics of doubt, I disconnected those because sometimes the nature of doubt changed between the trigger event and the turning point. The trigger event, something made them want to look into something and resolve something, but in the course of their investigations, the nature of their doubt or their criticism changed. And sometimes a lot of time passed between these moments, in one case, 10 years. So it's a process. Sometimes those things happen in rapid succession, but not necessarily. As a result, I sort of extended the models that we saw earlier. There's no big surprise, and here you'll see like I sort of colored it so to be aligned with the context. But yeah, I mean, I could call this step 1 or step 0. It sort of falls in. What I've noticed or feel is that the PMO phenomenon is not always recognized in existing models. Often there's sort of the expectation that people leave once they wake up, but that's not necessarily the case. And for a lot of Jehovah's Witnesses, that's a very important decision to make when they're like, okay, what do I do now? Among my participants, some of them spent years planning, just getting ready. They knew they wanted to leave. Some of them got suicidal, but they knew they couldn't leave yet. So that's, I think it's important to have like the granularity there.
Did you say what chemo stood for?
Yeah, physically and mentally out. Yeah.
Physically and mentally out. So
All right. So next then the themes. How much time do we have left? I identified 7 themes, central topics, subjects, or messages in the narratives that were not necessarily in all of the narratives, but in most of them. Things that stood out to me. Obviously, you know, I'm the instrument here, right? So my own background influences me when it comes to this type of analysis, to try to be transparent about, but here we go. So first of all, waking up. What was interesting to me is that everybody talks about waking up, but they don't necessarily define and by implication don't necessarily agree on what that means. When I started my dissertation, I proposed a definition that this is realizing that one is in a cult. But my participants, only 2 out of the 6 actually referred to Jehovah's Witnesses as a cult. So I had to adjust my definition. But they did describe the organization with cultic characteristics. They did talk about brainwashing, mind control, manipulation, a closed environment, being abusive and predatory. So I can only speculate as to why they wouldn't say this was a cult. Maybe didn't feel it was important, or it was obvious, or other reasons, but that's just what it was. So they all use the expression. They all seem to well, I don't know if they would have felt like they knew exactly what it meant, but it was like often like almost like an intuitive expression. Like I've had ex-witnesses reach out to me and say it felt like I woke up, which I thought was very interesting. The next theme was the negative effects of being so close to the leadership in Bethel. It's interesting to see like what effect did it have on the members to be at, you know, the local headquarters or the global headquarters, seeing some of these high level leaders, people that they perceive to be used by God, right, as a channel for God's communication. And by and large, they were disappointed. They did not feel it lived up to what they would have expected. And here's one of these cases. This was often a doubt that they managed. They told themselves these are imperfect people, but it's God's perfect organization. It's the most perfect organization run by imperfect people. So even though they were disappointed and a lot of them reported alcohol abuse, hypocrisy, double standards that they observed at Bethel, but they managed to say like, but it's not a problem that's so big that I need to do anything about it. So that was very interesting. The next theme was gaslighting, a suppression of their doubts, which was because they didn't have any confidence in their judgment. They thought there was something wrong with themselves. They were told something was wrong with them, or they I guess had internalized this view that you're so sinful, you're fallen. That it is your corruption, your sexuality. It was pronounced in particular with gay Bethelites from their childhood. They were convinced there was something inherently wrong with them. So when they started doubting, they wondered if it's them who's having the problem, not the organization. And when they couldn't avoid it, they wanted to make sure that how they approached something was logical and objective, which I think is related to the framework that Jehovah's Witnesses use in general. They're not very emotionally expressive like some of the charismatic churches. It's all very, what's that?
Suppress.
Yeah, exactly. And it's very, they focus a lot on teaching, learning, and the cognitive elements of faith. Like it's interesting, like you take a step back and look at the literature, a lot of their books are about teaching, knowledge, learning. There's a great emphasis on cognitive components. So even when they were exposed to doubt and criticism, there was a shift in emphasis on the cognitive components of it. If it was something emotional, it was easier to suppress, which is going to show up later in another one of those themes. Suicide was, again, not germane to the waking up experience, but I felt it was important to highlight this. Half of the participants reported being suicidal at one point. Really sad. Howie here is young as 14 years old because he realized he was gay and just felt there was no way out. One of the participants attempted to kill himself. And it was interesting because the experience of what happened when he came to in the hospital about 10 days later or so with organ failure, and his congregation knew that he was in hospital. His wife worked in that hospital and nobody came to check on him. That was like his final confirmation that, yeah, maybe he's not in the right organization. Something I'd alluded to earlier on as part of the chronology. One of the themes was that when they were not able to resolve their doubt, it got worse. And that was because typically they realized that they were not alone. Going back to the gaslighting, they realized that their doubt, their criticism was shared by others. They talked to people and found out, oops, yeah, oh, this other person has the same question. It's just nobody talks about it. It was either that or they came across new information, which was usually something that made them feel like they were being lied to. So the moment they started looking into their doubts and started digging a little bit, it got worse, which is why I think this activity is key, that they try to attempt to resolve their doubts. The second last of the themes was a turning point around discovering deception. Most of the participants used terms to that effect when they talked about their turning point at the very end. They realized they were being lied to. They found something that contradicted Watchtower teachings, and then they had questions about, well, am I being lied to in other areas? Why am I being lied to? Hold on, I'm calling this organization The Truth. How is this possible that there's any lies? Some of these stories are really just intense, where people would sneak out to go to the library and read a book and then like sit crying on the floor because they realized that they lied to all their lives. Sad stuff. And then going back to the 5 different areas to categorize doubt. What was interesting is in these stories, there was a convergence towards doctrinal disagreement. So I tried to highlight here the journey a little bit with the different events, the initial trigger, the initial event, the trigger event, and then the turning point. And you can see that towards the end, the turning point, all of them were in the doctrinal disagreement. So there were stories where people felt disappointed or felt moral outrage, but those were never the turning point. Those were maybe the trigger, maybe the initial doubt event, and then they started digging in the course of this attempt to resolve their doubts, discovering the deception. They usually ended up in this point where I'm like, oh, I disagree. And again, it's all cognitive. There was an emphasis on that, because when you see like the emotional suffering, like how they felt, it was easy for them to suppress that, how they felt. Like until they then found something where like, oh, no, I'm being lied to. And that was then the final straw, if you will. So those were the themes. So then I ended up adjusting my proposed definition for this term waking up, which I hear a lot. Yes, please.
I wonder how many people do you include in your research?
6. I had 6 participants, yes. Yeah, it was really tricky to find Bethelites who woke up while they were living at the compound, who talked about their stories. I found a lot more Bethelites who left Bethel first and then woke up. But I was curious to see if you live in this environment that is so highly controlled and where you have so much more to lose. Like, how do you wake up in that environment? Like one would assume that these are like fervent believers that are convinced, like, so how does that happen? And I only found 6.
Or
Well, for now, I'm taking a little bit of a break because it was very intense. And then we'll see what I'm really curious about. Like I mentioned, there were 2 individuals I came across who said in their interviews they did not believe anymore. Like one of the gentlemen said, like, he stopped believing in the Bible, he stopped believing it was the truth, and then he moved into the compound. And I'm itching to find out why. So maybe that's something I may pursue. I'm not sure yet though. Yeah. So I adjusted my definition, like I said. Initially, I said waking up is really related to recognizing you're in a cult, but I had to adjust that because it's not clear that this was always apparent to the participants. But they always talked about recognizing something deceptive, manipulative, and they always rejected it at the end. You look very skeptical.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, okay.
I'm waking up. I got 10 minutes on.
Thank you, appreciate that. All right, so then practical implications, recommendations. It seemed to me that when I look at the sequence of steps from doubts that were avoided and ignored to actually engaging with them, and then trying to solve the doubt that came up during the trigger event, that this decision to engage with these doubts and with these criticisms is a key differentiator, because they all had doubts, which I think explains why mere exposure to facts is not sufficient, which I'm sure in your experience, you probably all have a story like that. I have plenty. When I would approach people like, did you know this? And it doesn't seem to matter, because they don't engage with it. So empowering people to engage with it, to say like, no, your feelings are valid. If you feel disappointed, maybe there's a good reason. If you feel moral outrage, that may be justified. If you feel that this doesn't explain things, you're not alone. There's other people who don't understand this. I think this is key to help them feel empowered and take agency to engage. Something else, like I said, further down is the recognition of the PMO state, the physically in, mentally out. Like I say here, one of my participants was a PMO for 10 years, pretending to be a believer, going to meetings 2 or 3 times a week, going out and preaching, and during the whole time not even believing it because he felt he would lose everything. And I think this is something that maybe can be improved by just having more service offerings, options out there for people, where they can offset their exit costs, right? Like in terms of losing everything that they have, any type of support. I myself right now, right, like once this, I guess, gets out, somebody tagged me on LinkedIn, so I wouldn't be surprised if I get like a knock on the door and get invited to a judicial meeting. And what I'm told is that something that may work is once you get this invitation, you send a letter back from a lawyer and says, hey, what you plan to do, like I interpret as defamation, and there's going to be legal consequences to sort of threaten them with legal repercussions. So right now I'm trying to find a lawyer, and I've been trying for weeks, and it's really tricky. And I think if there's options like that out there, that may enable some people to sort of make that transition and cut connections that they want to cut.
lawyer here.
Let's talk.
She's volunteering. Right?
Exactly. Thank you. Yes, please. Yes. And then finally, like I said, there is a lot of data out there for people who are curious, either want to extend their research or are curious about researching something. It really opened a whole new avenue of potential research to me when I realized that I could use Michael's podcasts. There's tools where you can sort of like, you just provide the link in a YouTube video, it's just uploaded into Max QDA, and then you can use automatic coding. You could if you, had the inclination, right? You could process a lot of these interviews with a great deal of efficiency and speed to maybe get more insights, right? So that's something that's out there that some people may not be aware of. That can be very useful. And with that, 5 minutes left, we come to the Q&A part.